Hello, I'm Wheat. If you watch Death Battle and Death Battle related content on YouTube, you probably don't know me because my last review was on Ghost Rider vs. Spawn over a year ago. Unless you frequent the Death Battle Discord, in that case you probably wish you could forget me. I haven't done any DB reviews since because I only want to review episodes that I feel I have meaningful commentary on, not just review every episode as they come out, no matter my opinion on them. This episode is an exception because not only is it a matchup I really like, but as an episode I have a lot to say about it, even more so than I did for Spawn Rider. Before I start, I do want to say that although this review will be more on the negative side compared to my Spawn Rider review, that doesn't mean that I hate Death Battle. I don't like Death Battle. I love Death Battle. I have been a YouTube member for nearly 3 years. I spent over €100 on the Kickstarter. I own this signed poster, this coin, and I made Ben say this.
Boomstick! Spending 7 hours daily playing Genshin isn't cringe, it's a way of life.
This review isn't meant to shit on the end product of this episode or the show as a whole. It's made with love and criticism in mind. I am sharing what I think could be improved for future episodes. I hate that I have to say this at all, but I do know that people will think I only made this review to make fun of Death Battle and this episode. Disclaimers aside, let's start with Gru's analysis. I would say that Gru's analysis is the strongest part of this episode. Although I haven't watched all of the Despicable Me movies, I've watched most of them, and I think the analysis does an overall good job of showcasing Gru's story and his versus stats. I will definitely say this analysis focuses a lot more on versus than it does his story, and especially his family. But this I can excuse since the matchup has so many different factors that need to be addressed. The more simplistic story of Despicable Me can take a seat for a bit. I especially like them putting impact frames on his balloon pump for literally no reason. Them listing every named minion, Mel is a goat by the way, them calculating that Kevin is 3 billion years old, them calling AI artist evil, the Queen of England joke, and many other jokes do land well in this analysis. Them going over the minions' relationship with Gru, and how their love for him literally overrides their biological drive to serve the most evil villain was sweet, and does apply to the fight since I know a lot of people did think that the minion's incompetence would get Gru killed in the end. Overall, Gru's analysis I would say is great, but Megamind's I can't say is good. I don't think the analysis is bad by any means, but there are a few criticisms I do want to give towards it. I am nowhere near as familiar with Megamind as I am Despicable Me. I literally watched the first movie the day before the episode aired, but there are a few things in this analysis I think could have been tweaked. It's still very funny with running jokes like Boomstick pronouncing Metro City wrong, just like how Megamind does in the movie, and Wiz crashing out about how Metro Man was kind of a dick. The analysis definitely focuses a lot more on the first movie than any of its sequels, which I know is mostly because of how poorly received Doom Syndicate and the show were, but in the context of this episode, it is still very important to go into more details about these entries, since they do have a lot of versus relevant content in them. Speaking of versus relevancy, this analysis also primarily focuses on versus compared to the story, which once again I do understand since the matchup has so much to it, especially on Megamind's side. Even with this, the analysis heavily skips over the stories of important characters relevant to Megamind. Metro Man and Titan are mostly mentioned in passing, and they never go into detail about Megamind's relationship with Roxanne, despite that being such an integral part of the first movie. I think the stories of Megamind himself and Minion were well handled, and if they really had to save time, glossing over Metro Man and Titan I could understand, but I don't think it was a good idea to barely mention Roxanne. Even just saying that one of his main inspirations to do good was his interactions with Roxanne would have been nice, but we get none of that. Overall, one good analysis, one meh analysis. And with that, we get onto the fight, which is where most of my criticisms of the episode come from. Allow me to start with the parts of the fight I do like, because I don't want to overwhelm you with the amount of criticism I have. First off, I think Gru's performance by Keston Howard was good. Not exactly as the same as in the movies, but is a good impression that gets the job done. Both Minion and the Minions have pretty good voice performances too, Chum being voiced by Colin Nelson and the Minions being voiced by the animator of the fight, Luis Cruz. Megamind's voice I don't like as much, mostly because it doesn't seem to be based around the performance of Will Ferrell in the first movie, but I still do think Corey Wilder did a good job with his own take of the character. It's definitely different, but I don't think it's plain out bad. This animation is also just funny as hell, definitely its strongest point I would say. Megamind saying he needs a second pair of pants and having those pants be delivered to him later is a very Megamind thing to do. Also, having Gru land on the brick building instead of the pellet one is a classic. Minions taking popsicles from brainbots and referencing a certain evil moment is also entertaining. One of the best sections in this animation has to be the Megamind light show. This shot in particular is fantastic, and how you can see the individual brainbots in this closer shot is a great detail. Definitely the most impressive part of this animation. Although I don't think the animation is entirely bad, God, there are a lot of problems I do have with it, both on the animation itself and the writing. The most obvious issue is Gru's model. I understand it looked like ass, but it is something I can excuse that despite the community's best efforts, I have yet to see a Gru model on the internet that doesn't also look like ass. I don't want to rag on about how bad this model looked, because the only other option they had was to make a custom model, and this episode was likely already extremely expensive with the sheer amount of moving parts and characters they had to feature. Even though I can excuse the model, there are a few parts of its animation I do think could have been improved upon. First off, Megamind just straight up doesn't have a cape in this shot. He had one before, but it just disappeared here, making Megamind look weirder. He feels kinda naked without his cape. It doesn't help that after this shot, Megamind just never gets his cape back. I understand that capes are hard to animate, but if it was that much of a hassle to animate his cape all the way through, it would have been better if he just didn't have it at the start of the animation too. I don't like how he looks without his cape, but I could have lived with it more if it was just consistent. Similarly, although the bit of Megamind readying his death ray is very funny with Gru literally just sitting there waiting and Megamind awkwardly waving at him, Gru reacting to it by grabbing Mel and shooting the ray is way too quick. I think it would have been both better looking and funnier if the shot lingered as a beam clash for a bit before exploding and leading to the next shot. Although I have my issues with how the animation looks, my main criticism comes from the writing and how much of it frustrates me. First off, Megamind is a fucking dumbass through this entire fight. I understand that Megamind is a dumbass, and they mention that as one of the reasons Megamind would lose in the conclusion, but the entire episode doesn't feel like Gru outsmarting and taking advantage of the opening Megamind gives, and more like Megamind giving Gru everything he needs to win on a silver platter before dying. Within the fight, Megamind destroys Gru's ship thruster, causing him to fall, grabs Gru with the Brainpot avatar, and just talks to him before eventually dehydrating him, which instantly gets reverted because this guy somehow ate Gru's cube despite him being sent flying away from Megamind. Okay, I guess. Megamind then drops his win condition and shoots the death ray, which Gru and the minions no-sell, only to do nothing to stop Gru from shooting him with his own weapon and instantly dying. The entire animation makes both Megamind and Minion look completely incompetent, despite them claiming in the conclusion that Megamind and Minion were both extremely smart and tactical, if not successful of course. I understand that the conclusion and the fight animation shouldn't be one-to-one, since a lot of matchups would become a lot less interesting if they did it that way. But the amount of contradiction in this episode when it came to the fight and the conclusion is diabolical. They claim that Gru and Megamind's arsenal are about even, since although Gru's weapons are more deadly, the D-gun alone is way more diverse in its abilities. Within the fight, Megamind begs Minion to get him some new pads instead of shooting the missiles with the dehydration gun, and then only uses it to shoot Gru's engine. During the entire fight, the D-gun that is integral to Megamind's whole win condition is shot a total of 3 times by Megamind, uses 2 of its dozen useful modes, and then Megamind fucking loses it before getting insta-killed by it. This kill overall pisses me off, because although it does make for a funny reason why these two would kill each other, and Megamind literally about to explain why this was a big misunderstanding is hilarious, it's just so unsatisfying how Megamind isn't outsmarted or outgunned by Gru, he is literally insta-killed by his own weapon and incompetence. I could understand if they had Gru kill Megamind with one of his more powerful weapons, as the conclusion claims would overpower Megamind's weapons, but instead he's killed by a gun that Gru doesn't even own. Gru himself isn't written amazingly in this episode either, with his response to Megamind asking if he knows who he is being a forcefully shoved in reference that doesn't even make sense for this moment in particular. I would have liked this scene so much more if they just had Gru say "no" in response instead of putting a quote in so forcefully. It would make the following interaction of Megamind getting annoyed at Gru's lack of banter so much funnier, and would make sense for both characters since Megamind also criticized Titan for not bantering back, and Gru historically just doesn't give a fuck about the monologuing or gloating of his adversaries. I think the biggest issue I have with the fight comes with Minion and the underutilization of Megamind's arsenal. Despite the conclusion saying how useful Minion is in this fight, being similarly as smart as Megamind and being able to use his tech, Minion spends the entire fight sitting on his ass and begging the yellow fucks to stop destroying his drones. The conclusion makes a point of saying how much of a better right-hand man Minion is compared to the likes of Nefario, which I absolutely agree with, but Nefario isn't even in the fight and I feel like he contributed more than Minion did. There were so many ways they could have had Minion do something more, especially since they already dedicated a voice and a model to him, like leaving him disguised as Megamind and have him go distract Gru while Megamind prepares something else. By the way, the disguise watcher is one of Megamind's strongest tools, and the biggest factor in the first movie is not used at all in this fight. Neither is the mech that they show would give Megamind a better chance in hand-to-hand with Gru, nor the Metroman suit. I understand that these parts of his arsenal would require even more work to implement in the fight, but with how crucial some of them are to the conclusion, it's extremely glaring when they just don't show up in the fight. Like I said earlier, the D-gun that is so vital to Megamind is barely utilized and somehow actively detrimental to him. Gru is a bit better since he actually uses his arsenal and win conditions, albeit briefly. He shoots the freeze ray like 3 times, he shoots the shrink ray and laser gun each, they both miss. The Mega Minions do help in sticky situation, but none of the regular minions do anything that isn't showcased in a montage on these screens chums watch them on. I hate to keep bringing it up, but the finishing blow isn't even done with a weapon that Gru owns, it's done with the fucking D-gun. Although I like the callback that Gru does before shooting a D-gun and Megamind's reaction to it, it's still just a disappointing death that I think could have been handled better. There are definitely more criticisms I could give to individual parts of the fight, but I think you guys get the point. Besides, it only gets worse when we get to the conclusion. A lot of my issues with this conclusion come down to the category system, which if you watch pretty much any DB reviewer, you'll know how frustrating these categories can be. I completely understand why they use the category system and how useful it is for bringing more casual viewers to stay for the conclusion, but in this episode, the categories are so poorly handled. I don't think that categories can't work for this matchup, but the way they sorted them baffles me. Starting with the arsenal, they make a point that Megamind's tech and D-gun have more variety and insta-win conditions than Gru's tech, but Gru's is much stronger overall. This isn't wrong, but they don't really showcase it well, saying that Gru's weapons are stronger because the shrink ray can shrink the moon. The shrink ray is strong, but Gru didn't make it. The rest of his weapons are nowhere near as potent as it is, and the moon feat isn't even a fucking attack potency feat. The moon grows back later! And then they say that Gru's weapons are stronger, but Megamind could instantly win the fight, so they say it's a tie in this category? Wouldn't it work better if you gave them two separate categories for this, like power and trump cards, giving Gru the win in power and Megamind the win in trump cards? Instead, they say this category is a draw, and say that it mostly comes down to a quick draw, which isn't really accurate, especially later when they say that Gru will always win the quick draw. They also say that Gru has similar weapons to Megamind's win cons and just don't elaborate on that. Death Battle Team, I love y'all, you just piss me off sometimes. The minion category once again baffles me because they say that although the brain bots outnumber the minions 1 to 10, the minions have multiple ways of dismantling, hacking, or just no-selling the brain bots. This somehow doesn't give them the win in this category, because Old Chum can use Megamind's tech and is just as smart as Megamind, which they also contradict later with saying how incompetent and easily flustered Megamind could get. But this is not a tie because the minions are greater than the brain bots, but Old Chum is greater than the minions, but Old Chum is not as strong as the Mega Minions, and somehow that means it's a tie. I don't even know if he worked on this episode, but somehow this is Liam's fault. The skill category, as you'd expect, is not much better. They say that although both of them have their clumsiness, Gru tends to succeed more and then just never give an example of Gru doing that. Although I agree that Megamind tends to gloat more and get flustered more often, saying him not just using the dehydration gun on the Doom Syndicate is an example of him being competent doesn't sit well with me. That's not a lose condition, that's a plot hole. They also say that Gru is significantly faster because the speed feat they give for Megamind is him dodging electricity and not lightning. This isn't in the script, but I just realized they never gave Gru an attack potency feat for any of his weapons, just thought I'd mention that. I don't like bringing up feats not in the episode, because usually the team has their own reasons for not using certain feats, either because they don't buy them, or they consider them outliers. But in this case, they claim that this character, who I'm not looking up the name of, shoots electricity, not lightning. The fact is, you could see them conjuring a lightning storm in the show. If you're going to claim that these beams aren't lightning, then you could at least elaborate on that in a corner box. Overall, I don't like this episode. I am disappointed because I love this matchup. But hey, that's how things are sometimes. And like I said at the start, this video isn't made with hate in mind. I simply want the team to improve for future episodes and what I think they could have better in this one. Done better. English is very difficult. Anyway, I'll see y'all next year when there might be another episode I have something to say about. Next time is Denji vs. Yuji, I don't really care.